I'd like to thank as well my panel here just joining me today. Technology and transformation for ASEAN, the rise of B2B is, I think, an important topic. You know, by some estimates, B2B global payments, which is a space I know pretty well, could be worth over about 2 trillion in a couple of years' time, which is clearly a big figure in itself, but that actually, I think, dwarfs a lot of the value that will be created by international commerce flows as they grow, mobile data and big data and AI becoming more and more pervasive. It means that more SMEs will be able to participate in the global economy, and it means that, in other words, we're going to have much more B2B. And you know, it's interesting when you think of that. The poster child stories in fintech are all about the B2C unicorns. They're all about the Gojeks, the Grabs, the Fangs, the Bats, if you're in China, mobile wallets, content streaming. But actually, it's B2B technology that plays the biggest part in enabling that and also in creating transformation in many of the value chains. In ASEAN in particular, the growth of GDP per capita, the rise of interregional trade, accords between the ASEAN countries are encouraging the transfer of people and goods, and all of that simply means the B2B is going to grow. You know, broadly speaking, I think there are 3 sorts of areas that the panel is probably going to look to investigate today with your help when you've been asking us some questions. Internal company transformation, the kinds of things that occur within financial services organizations and within other organizations. Value chain transformation, across and down vertically within value chains. And finally, perhaps, we'll touch on marketplace, cross-border transformation, things that are happening in the ecosystems more generally. So let me just, without any further ado, introduce the guests a little bit more. So Clara Lee is Head of Technologies and Operations at RHB Bank. And as one of the largest banks in Malaysia and with a footprint around all of ASEAN and, of course, here in Singapore, they see a lot of what's happening in the fintech space, and they have to respond to it. Clara, with the role of Head of Tech and Operations, really is front and center of having to figure out how the bank can be involved in the new space and actually try to leverage off the old competencies and technologies that they have. Next is Benjamin, and Benjamin, as was described, really works with Oracle and with Oracle's customer set to try and ideate a future for them in the technical space. And he'll talk a little bit about some of that, I'm sure. And he's also himself a B2B startup entrepreneur with the company called Viki, which you'll see out on the floor here, which I'm sure he'll reference as we go through. And finally, Damien Wong, who's Vice President and General Manager for Redhat, which, if any of you have noticed in the news, is soon to become Redhat / powered by IBM. But, and for those of you who don't know, Redhat's a world-leading provider of enterprise open source solutions. And so, you know, Linux solution sets and other solution sets in the cloud, which really, I think, gives a unique position of Damien to talk about some of the interactivity that crosses the ecosystems in B2B. So, without further ado, let me talk a little bit about some of the key things that we should talk about here. I'm just going to go back if I can. Okay, so fintech, core to digital transformation. I'd probably like to maybe ask Clara initially, partly because you're sitting next to me, and partly because I know that you're right in the middle of doing some of this right now with RHB. What does that mean for you as a tech and operations leader for a bank dealing with the fintech world?
Right. When I started with RHB 3 years ago, the branch here has underinvested in technology, right? So we had to figure out how do we do digital transformation, and today we are very focused in digital transformation, aiming to deliver differentiated digital offerings to our customers, right? But looking at the landscape, and we realized that we have the entire fintech community. There is a lot of potential that we can unleash. If done right, collaboration with third party actually will give us that opportunity to choose the right technology to bring to the market an infinite digital products. So in RHB Singapore, for example, give you an example. The latest product that we launched back in September, RHB Travel FX. We started with no card ops. We have practically no card system, but we wanted to go to the market with a payment solution, with a card solution for travel, perfect companion for customers. So when we look at that and we realize that what we could do is to partner Fintechs. So in this Travel FX, the bank actually pulls together 3 Fintechs. We have VIX Verify that provides eKYC, fantastic solution, fantastic technology. We have Wirecard that actually provides the multi-currency e-wallet as a back end. And we have another Fintech from all the way from Jakarta to actually come in and build the Travel FX app for us from scratch. So we put together Fintechs, stitch them together, but of course we're not saying that the bank do not contribute in this. The bank also build their own technology, right? So the bank also ideate and also did what is the first, now you can top up from your current account, from a bank account, direct to this Travel FX e-wallet. That should be the first in Singapore, direct from Makassar all the way to your e-wallet without opening an account with the bank. So this is collaboration in its perfection, I believe, with fintech companies and delivering a very differentiated product to the market.
Great. Well, and a good example, we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about some of the challenges around that. But for yourself, Damien, what have you seen as some of the challenges of working in the fintech ecosystem and some of the benefits that it can bring in transformation with the major financial services companies?
Yeah, sure. I think first and foremost, some definitions, right? Digital transformation usually refers to adoption of digital technologies to create new value streams or business models within traditional industries. So traditional financial institutions using disruptive digital technologies in ways to meet new or existing business needs, customer needs, would be a form of digital transformation. And obviously, traditional FIs would not be, most of them are not young organizations. Most of them have a legacy, and they come from a world where technology moved a lot more slowly, and in many cases, technology was viewed more as a support kind of function as opposed to the core of the business. Today, I think if you talk to any financial institution, I think one of the first few that I heard the quote come from was the CEO of Citibank, right, Michael Corbett. He said, Citibank is a technology company except with a banking license. It's great to see that whole paradigm shift from, banks with some technology support to, technology companies with banking capabilities or financial, mandates. So fintechs are different, right? The term fintech, which is financial technology type organizations, are digital natives in the most part, right? And B2B fintechs are a subset of the fintech ecosystem. And coming from that whole digital native ecosystem means that they are comfortable with doing things in a digital way. And if you look at some of the disruptive technologies, in fact, most of the disruptive technologies that are out there, they've come from open source collaboration, open source, innovation, blockchain, AI, ML, you name it. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I think that's where there's a little bit of a challenge for traditional FIs, traditional banks and insurers and so on and so forth. These organizations may not have come from that background where they are open and comfortable using some of these open sources of innovation, whereas if you're a fintech, you're a startup, you have nothing to lose. You start using technology from the open source community, and then when you become successful, obviously you can collaborate with a traditional FI or you can compete with a traditional FI, and I think that they are essential to driving digital transformation of FIs and can be very, very critical to the success of traditional FIs when they want to transform, because if you have someone who has good innovation and they are able to not only just ideate but create some tangible value from these digital technologies, and we have traditional FIs who have a challenge, perhaps organically coming up with some of this innovation, then being able to take in some of that innovation into their organizations, I think it's going to help them with that process of transforming digitally. So I think B2B Fintechs are going to be critical in terms of helping banks and insurers transform digitally. Yeah.
Yep. And Damien, I think I agree. Yeah. I certainly agree with you on that. And I think I'm going to want to leverage off that to a point with Ben. And looking at both your experiences, Ben, both your work that you're doing with Oracle in digital ideation and with your partners creating largely ecosystems really from a B2B perspective, and what you've done personally in terms of Viki. I think part of the challenge that Damien alludes to is that startups, fintechs, typically in the B2B space, have a challenge in that they struggle with the regulatory environment often. And some of that regulatory environment is some of the solution sets that you've been working with.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think one of the key barriers of entry, which is the challenges, it's not only just the understanding the adoption of the technology, but the ability for the compliance and the regulation to accept it as well. I applaud MAS and many central banks that's beginning on this sandbox program to ensure that the new technologies and together with the young fintechs with great technologies are able to come into the play in terms of the inclusiveness of these technology. I also had the privilege to work with both the World Economy Forum that they're launching a digital ASEAN workshop here within the region, and together with governments around the regions, like for example the Infocom Media Development Authority with their open innovation platform. I'm highly encouraged where this B2B, in terms of not only just the flow of your pipes money that's coming into play, but which is later on our discussion as well, which is the full digital transformation and the process of how document and data flow within the region is going to take place as well. And my observation is this, right? Be you are a SME, a startup to a SME to a big corporates. We are living in a time of moment where you just can't solve a problem alone. I mean, if one try to attempt to solve a problem alone, then either you're building something that is very ivory tower, just for you only, but the complexity of the world's problem today, it's far more than even an Oracle can undertake, right? And therefore, one of the key works that we also recognize as a corporation is to be able to open up this ecosystem and therefore the whole cloud strategy. But more importantly, this is where the new business unit within Asia Pacific is being formed, and together with EMEA, which is called NEXT. We are a business co-innovation lab within Oracle. That means we not only invest in our range of technology and people, but we also are co-partnering and co-journeying this whole process innovation with our very key partners and customers, and that's important. And while working towards this, I believe the B2B model that is extensively building up the pipes, the partnership, and the ecosystem, this is where banks, both the FIs, together with the highly innovative fintechs, there's a win-win proposition. And what do I mean by that? The ability for FIs or more transformative industry that wants to have a leap quick to market. Now you have an option of leveraging instead of self-build. So that's one. Two, you have an omni-channel, a multi-pronged strategy that you can go attack in the industry. Some might work, some might not work. Well, you're quick to learn and quick to fail. Because in the whole dynamism of how ASEAN is evolving, there is actually no one single formula that's able to sustain for half a decade. And so to be able to, on an agile basis, which some of the industry just somehow need some time, If you're going to build up a team of your own, you're going to hire the best digital transformation officer, you're going to build up the best chief architect, you're going to hire the best ex-McKinsey essential consultant. That's a whole process altogether. And whether can this organization have the brand name to attract all of them, that's a second question by itself. So it's people, process, technology. And if you want to jump to market quick, fast, no matter how small, how big you are, partner 6 months, figure out an agile sprint across 3-4 sprints. Hey, you might have a go-to-market product, right? Why not? But I think the crux of the matter here is the definition of the actual business use case that we're after. And I think we'll be talking more about that in our later presentation.
I think I agree with Damien. I also agree with Benjamin. But I would like to add one more win, is win for the customer, win for the bank, and win for the fintech. It has to be win, 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 right? And not win-win, right? It has to be the win for a customer as well. Like Damien says, all banks embark on innovation, so do we, but as experience tells us, when the bank tries to do corporate innovation, it's a bit slow, and it always tends to be very inside out, hardly outside in, because we are hardwired like that, right? So it's usually very process-centric customer journey that we will build, and not truly a customer-centric customer journey. And that's where the fintechs comes in, right? Because they are very focused very narrowly on a certain function, but they deliver excellent customer journey, customer experience, excellent, right? But because they are very narrowly focused on one function, when you go to the market, it's not one function. You have to go with the entire product, right? And that's where the bank comes in, because the bank is a very natural platform to bring fintechs together, right? Piece them together, and go to the market with a differentiated product. And that's where the bank has this aggregator role, right? And that benefits the bank, benefits the fintech, because the fintech, we have the customer base, we have that customer trust, which the fintech may lack to scale. So it will be a win to us, it will be a win to them. And the customers enjoy a very differentiated products, addressing their unique needs, and that's a win for the customers as well. So that should be what we go for moving forward.
No, I think that's an interesting point, Clara, and I think we probably could flick to some questions, which I know we have from the audience as well at this point. We've got a few more minutes before we need to move to the next panel, but I think and as some of those questions come through, I think one of the key things that I think you highlight is this issue around the ability for banks to be able to create the kinds of reach and value propositions today that are capable of being created through digital, but that actually, to your point, they tend to often be inside out, and that's a real challenge. Whereas fintechs start the other way around, and they start ideating right at the coalface and work backwards, and the technology is enabling them to do that much more today than perhaps it ever has been. And I think, Damien, when you talk about Redhat and some of the open systems that you've been working with, some of the projects that you've worked on,
Yep.
how do fintechs use the platforms that you have in order to be able to reach and connect with banks?
Well, there are many, many examples of how fintechs use our technology. I mean, for those who are familiar with the largest open source software company in the world, and yes, we will be the largest software acquisition in history, which is not bad, given that we're effectively selling something that is free, right? From that perspective. So I like to capture that with what Benjamin has said earlier, right? I think we have to move away from living in an ivory tower and thinking that we know best and that we're pushing things down, to one where we accept that the future is inherently unpredictable and uncertain, and that disruption can happen from anywhere and from anyone. So once we get into that kind of a mindset, then I think we're a little bit more open to collaboration. And collaboration is going to be key, because that's really the topic here, right? Collaboration really means how do you work with one another to get a win-win-win in your definition, Clara, perspective. So things like APIs, right? I mean, people will tell me, what kind of technologies? APIs, right? That's one of the fundamental ways of collaborating, having an API infrastructure that allows you to collaborate seamlessly. Someone else tells me containers, right? Which is another way. You can build applications quickly using DevOps and so on and so forth. A lot of fancy stuff that we do today. But I think, and we mentioned this earlier, right? It's not just about the technology. It's also about the culture that is important, because it has to be a culture of collaboration. It has to be a culture of innovation that is important. If you notice, people who are most successful at innovation are typically those that are most receptive of things like failure, right? Definition of innovation is trying new stuff, and when you try new stuff, some things are definitely not going to succeed. And when they don't succeed, then how do you react? I think as an organization, if you are open to accepting that, so-called failure, right, is actually a step towards improving and doing better, then I think that innovation can flourish. And then the other thing is obviously collaboration, which means partnerships, accepting that you alone cannot meet every single need. Of your customers, of your ecosystem, and therefore you need a stakeholder group, a wider ecosystem, both internally and externally, to do that. And that's where the fintechs come into play, because the fintechs form an invaluable part of that ecosystem. They provide an outside-in perspective that sometimes when you've been staring at your own stuff for too long, you don't have that wider perspective. So I think it's actually a win-win to have fintechs work with banks and insurers, and be able to bring value to both parties and their customers, from that perspective.
I'd like to register an additional point of Damien, right? I think from a startup perspective, one key point in terms of my experience is very much in terms of the trust and the assurance. And normally a lot of time when you deal with huge contracts, and especially with huge, big established organization, is the posturing of trust. And this posturing of trust comes from really fundamentally the foundation of wanting to build a secure infrastructure in terms of people, process, technology. Not only VKey, I've seen beginning payment companies. There's a payment company based out, founded by Israel, called Rapid. They are very focused in terms of building payment networks with core security trusted people, compliance guys from the US, Australia, from PayPal, the ability to build secure APIs and gateways all throughout. I think the ability to also posture to build that foundation of trust assurance to be able to deal with the ecosystem is one very important point. And once you start having discussion with governments, with eKYC, both in Indonesia, Singapore, India, is all happening with their digital identities. In addition to that, with banks as well, which is opening up bank accounts, new credit cards, debit cards. They will ask security and compliance questions. And I think this is where a lot of this effort and the foundation needs to be put into. And this is what makes the partnership works, right? It's not only the fast and agile, but the ability to also form a common platform of trust where mutually both business will be able to build on top of.
Yep, look, that's a very good point. And I think we've got about 30 or so seconds each left. So I'm going to ask you each, what in your view is one of the most interesting pieces of tech in particular that you've seen that will help from a B2B perspective over the last 6, 12 months? Because it changes. It's changing quite rapidly.
It's changing. I think to me personally, I think the most transformative technology that actually makes and break is actually us adopting cloud. Very true in RHB Singapore, because we just adopted cloud this year. Brings down infrastructure costs so much. Now for us to produce something, it's way cheaper and way faster, which means the velocity of us going into the market is going to be many, many times more than what we could do. And but because we're on cloud, we then have this ability to then collaborate with even more fintechs, right? Born bred in cloud. So much easier and so much faster. And with that ecosystem, we are able to really build a lot more faster, a lot more products actually. But partnership is key, right? Partnership is really key. We see our fintech partners not like vendors. Traditionally, banks sees tech companies as vendors, but we have evolved, and we have to evolve, I believe, to view the partners, tech partners, as partners and not vendors. Today, we would have a customer problem statement, and we will go to our fintech partners and say, come ideate with us. We want to solve this customer problem statement. There is a certain discomfort in the beginning because they are and can be your direct competitor, that's for sure. But we need to break down that wall. And when we break down that wall, that true collaboration can happen. And they do bring a lot more new perspective that we never ever think of as a bank. To be able to ideate together. It's a very different engagement from a traditional vendor where we don't do that, right? We conduct a tender, you get the job done and you go away, and it's about maintenance. Now our fintech partners are our partners to ideate, to solve a certain customer problem, right? Another piece of technology I think is very important to us moving forward is AI, right? Because intelligence automation is so needed. You cannot just go out and digitize the front, a sexy channel. The service promise is going to drop because there are just this manual process going on, right? So you need to have, I believe AI will definitely help automate processes in the bank and be able to also enhance customer experience. So these two, cloud plus AI, I think are the transformative technology that will make a difference for us.
Well, look, I was going to give more time, but unfortunately we've run out of time. And it's fitting, I think, that Clara, you as the person from the bank here actually is the one to talk about some of the transformation that needs to occur in the ecosystem, because you're the one who's got the opportunity to take customers on that journey. So, look, thank you all very much for joining me on the panel today. I hope that was useful and helpful for everybody out there in the audience, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.